Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. What you're about to see is the first of 3 interviews that I got with Doug Brignole. Doug is the 2019 AAU Mr. Universe, both in his age category, Doug turned 60 in 2019, and overall. And as a guy closing in on 60 myself, I find that pretty darn cool. Doug is very enthusiastic and very into the science of building muscle. Whether you agree or you disagree with Doug's approach to training, I think it's worth checking out. I found it pretty interesting, so I hope you do too. Huh. So, hey everybody. Well, if you've tuned into this video, odds are you know the name Doug Brignole already. Well, you should. Doug is a longtime bodybuilder. He has been Mr. California, Mr. America, Mr. Universe, a bunch of other Misters as well, and is Mr. Universe, in fact. Doug is a motivational speaker, a fitness coach, and a writer. Doug has published a bunch of articles in Iron Man and other places. With Adrian Tan, he is the co-author of $1 Million Muscle, a sociological history of the fitness industry. And Doug is also the author of The Physics of Fitness, a book that is all about exactly what that title implies. So, Doug, thank you very much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, you bet. I really appreciate your sharing your time with this fledgling YouTube channel.
It won't be fledgling long, I'm sure.
Well, you know, we have hopes.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I have a short list, actually, of people that I want to invite to interview. And I thought I'd start with the folks who wouldn't in a million years do it.
Oh, come on. My pleasure to be here.
You were one of them. So, well, a little bit ago, you and I were talking about the physics of fitness. Now, I've read $1 Million Muscle, but I haven't yet read The Physics of Fitness.
Okay, well, $1 Million Muscle is a sociology book. Adrian Tan is a PhD sociology professor. So that book is not a how-to workout book at all. It's a book for someone who might be curious about the behaviors within the fitness industry, which would include everything from, advertising, marketing, trends, false advertising, things like that. But if you're interested in knowing how to work out best, how to avoid injury, how to be most efficient with your time in the gym, that's not the book. The Physics of Fitness is what that's all about. Biomechanics is obviously biology and mechanics combined. So when we talk about biology and biomechanics, we're talking specifically about the musculoskeletal system, which is bones and muscles and joints, of course, and the neurology that gets triggered when certain movements occur. So that's the anatomical portion of it. And then the physics portion of it is just basic physics, right? Simple mechanics. At all times, when we're lifting weights, physics is playing a role. Whether or not these limbs that you're moving, whether it's your forearm or your lower leg or your upper arm, whatever it is that's in play, is going to follow physics principles exactly the way a crane would. So the question is, what happens when you combine knowledge of anatomical function, i.e., what might be designated as the ideal movement for the front deltoid, for the pectoralis major, for the latissimus, the ideal function, the ideal pathway that limb would take with that muscle, and combine that with the physics of it, where the resistance increases and decreases and why.
Okay.
So just to give you an analogy of how important this analysis is, let's start off with a comparison of 2 tricep exercises. We're going to compare parallel bar dips and the load that it places on your triceps versus what might be called the skull crusher. So in the way I explain in my book is kind of a simplified way. I usually call a vertical lever a 0 lever, and I call a horizontal lever a 100% lever.
Okay, so vertical, 0, horizontal.
Right, and a 45-degree angle would be a 50% lever. Now, I'm not using geometry or trigonometry to calculate that, and the numbers and the percentage would be slightly different if you did. But it would be foolish for us to expect bodybuilders or trainers to need to learn trigonometry in order to make calculations. What matters is what's more and what's less, and we get a good feeling from it this way. Okay.
I hope we don't need to learn trigonometry or my
yeah, exactly. Well, you don't. We can just simplify it and say 0%, 100%, 50%, and gradations in between. Okay. So let's just say you're weight 180 pounds. And first of all, you acknowledge that your forearm lever is what's being operated by the tricep. This is the operating lever of the tricep. So when you're doing parallel bar dips, you start off in the up position, and the forearm and the upper arm are both vertical. They're both neutral. Your body weight is bearing down through those bones into your hands. And yes, there's pressure on your hands, but since there's no resistance crossing either of those bones, the muscles that operate those bones are in the neutral position. They don't have to load. They don't have to work, okay? As you start to descend, the elbow starts to bend. The forearm dips back about 11% from that neutral position. The forearm goes all the way to horizontal, right? But the forearm is not being, the upper arm is not being operated by the tricep, it's being operated by the front deltoid. When you push downward, it is the front deltoid and the pectoral muscle that pushes that upper arm bone downward, right? But it's the tricep is being operated by the forearm is being operated by the tricep. So if you weigh 180 pounds, we're going to separate that into two arms, 90 pounds per side. The length of your forearm is about a 12-to-1 magnifier because of its length. Its ratio between the joint where the tricep ties in, and where the weight is being applied is a 12-to-1 ratio, approximately. Okay, so we're going to take that 90 pounds, multiply times 12. Now multiply times the 11% of active that forearm has become by moving from the neutral position, 11%. The result is about 119 pounds of load per tricep. And the energy cost to do that is your body weight of 180 pounds. So now let's take those same numbers and move over to a flat bench, a pair of 20-pound dumbbells. You lower them down, but now notice that your forearm does go horizontal. It does enter that 100% maximum position. You do get the full load of whatever's in your hand when that forearm is horizontal, okay, which is when your elbow is bent at 90 degrees, which is the same as where the maximum load is when you're doing parallel bar dips, when your elbow is at 90 degrees. All right, so now we're gonna take this 20 pounds, multiply times the length of your forearm, a factor of 12, multiply times 100% instead of 11%, and the load is 240 pounds of load per tricep, and the total energy cost is 40 total pounds. So the question is, would you rather load your triceps with 240 pounds of resistance with only 20 pounds in each hand of effort, or would you rather load your tricep with 119 pounds of resistance with your body weight of 180?
It sounds to me, if we take that question as more than rhetorical, then that the parallel bar dip is not going to be as effective an exercise as those dumbbell skull crushers. Am I right about that?
It's not as efficient.
Not as efficient.
You're not going to get as much bang for your buck. You're not going to get as much reward for your cost. Okay. Now, someone might say, yes, but the parallel bar dip is a compound exercise and it's working other muscles.
Fair enough.
And I would say, okay, fine, hold that thought for just a minute. Let's first ask ourselves, can I ever load my triceps as much with parallel bar dips as I can with a skull crusher? And the answer is theoretically, yes. I mean, you're getting load, you're just getting a lesser percentage. So at 11%, you would have to add so much more weight around your neck or around your waist to finally reach the 240-pound load of tricep load that by that point, you'd blow out your front deltoid. So we're talking percentages, right? Okay, so now let's look at the other two muscles that are working when you're doing parallel bar dips. Mostly front deltoid and some degree of chest muscle, pectoral muscle. Now, the reason I say some degree is because one of the rules that we need to look at when we're asking ourselves, how good is this exercise for this body part? The first thing we have to ask ourselves is that limb that's being operated by that muscle doing what it does best? Meaning moving towards the origin of that muscle. So imagine that Imagine that I give you a rope and I tie the other end of the rope to a heavy barrel. And I stand back and I say, now pull on the rope. The only direction that barrel is going to move toward is toward you. Muscle origins are the same. Muscle origins pull the limb that is connected to that muscle fiber toward them and nowhere else. So the most efficient direction of movement for a limb to travel would be towards the origin of that target muscle. Well, since most of the pectoral muscles are on the sternum, and the fibers run mostly across your chest, laterally, right? That's why a chest press is a chest exercise, because the humerus is moving away from the sternum and then toward the sternum, toward the origin of the muscles, right? But when you're doing a parallel bar dip, it's not doing that. You will get some assistance from the pectoral muscles, but they are neither lengthening fully nor shortening fully, nor are they doing that exclusively. So you could never rely on parallel bar dips as a singular best chest exercise. You would have to do another good chest exercise like supine dumbbell press or something like that, right? Same thing with the triceps. You couldn't rely on that as a standalone tricep exercise. You'd have to do a push down or something else, right? So the point is, someone who says, oh, this is a compound movement, so it works 3 exercises in one, I would say, yeah, but you could do one exercise for each of those 3 muscles and work those muscles better than what you'd get from a parallel bar dip and not waste the time with the parallel bar dip. And the front deltoid is getting more work than all the other 2 muscles are. And that probably isn't the objective of your exercise, nor is it the ideal movement. So the ideal movement for a front deltoid is to extend just to about here, not to here. This is overstretching the front deltoid. So you want to extend to here, and then you want to contract the front deltoid somewhere right around here. And you don't end parallel bar dips there. So it overstretches and undercontracts the front deltoid. So it's not a good tricep exercise. It's not a good chest exercise. And it's not, now it involves those 3, yes. But to try to justify doing it because it works all 3 as if it works all 3 muscles as well as other exercises do is just false. So this is how it gets very complicated, because we're talking about directions of anatomical movement, we're talking about physics, and then it gets even a little bit more complicated when you start talking about some neurological things. If I give you a dumbbell and I tell you to hold this with your elbow bent at 90 degrees, your bicep will be loaded, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a rule in neurology called reciprocal innervation. And that rule basically dictates that any muscle that is on the opposite side, that is the antagonist of a loaded muscle, will automatically shut off to prevent interference with the working muscle. Okay?
Okay.
That's how our body is coordinated, right? So when you're playing soccer or baseball, certain things have to release while other things contract for movement to occur gracefully, right? You can't be competing with yourself, interfering with yourself. So what the central nervous system does is it sends a relaxation synapse to your triceps when your bicep is engaged to prevent it from accidentally contracting while you're trying to do what you need to do with your bicep. So at all times when you're lifting a weight and some muscle is loaded, something else is being automatically shut off by your central nervous system to allow that working muscle to operate without interference. Now that is easy enough to understand when we're only talking about curls, but it gets a little bit more complicated when we start talking about compound movements, because a compound movement involves more than one joint, right? So let's just look at a squat. You've got the hip joint moving and the knee joint moving, right? And when people do squats, let's just say for the moment, barbell squats. If you were to do barbell squats, your objective is to primarily work and grow your quadriceps, work and grow your gluteus, right? Now, incidentally, you're getting some lower back, erector spinae work, but that's not usually the objective. The objective is glutes and quadriceps, okay? But when your gluteus is activated and your gluteus is a hip extensor, hip extension automatically shuts off hip flexion.
All right.
So your hip flexors, you have 5 hip flexors, but one of your 5 hip flexors is the rectus femoris, which is that part of the quadricep that's right in the center. because
Okay.
that is the only one of the three quadricep muscles that crosses the hip joint also. The other three quadricep muscles only cross the knee joint and only extend the knee. But because this one muscle, which is right in the center, you know which one muscle I'm talking about, right? The rectus femoris is right here. Oops.
Yeah, right.
It's this muscle right here.
Mine doesn't look like that, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Well, that muscle crosses, so that's basically 25% of your quadricep. So when you're squatting, 25% of your quadricep is shutting off because of the activation of your hip extension muscles. But it gets more complicated still, because your glute is not only the only hip extensor. Your hamstrings also participate. Well, if you start loading the hamstring as you would anytime you hip extend, what's opposite the hamstring? The quadricep.
Sure.
So you're sending a relaxation synapse to the quadricep because you're trying to activate the hamstring. So here you are struggling under the weight of this barbell, which is already compressing your spine, without knowing that your entire quadricep is being compromised, especially the rectus femoris. But because of the fact that when you're squatting, that lower leg only dips forward about 30 degrees, it's more neutral than it is fully active.
Okay.
Right? So that allows you to lift a heavier weight, just as dips allows you to move a heavier weight. I explain it as when you're using levers that are mostly vertical, it's like using the same physics they would use in a car jack when you're trying to raise the weight of a car with the least amount of human effort.
Sure.
Right? If your goal is to lift a lot of weight, then use levers that are more vertical than they are horizontal. Right? So yeah, okay, you can squat a lot of weight, and that is fooling you into thinking that you're really loading your quadriceps a lot. But what you don't know is that neurologically speaking, you're causing some interference with the activation of those muscles, and you're compressing your spine at the same time.
Okay.
So when someone argues like, oh, you shouldn't do isolation exercise, you do compound exercise, it's like, the only reason why you say that is because you're making the assumption that moving more weight builds more mass. But if you knew biomechanics, if you knew the neurology and you knew the physics, you could actually load your quadriceps more and without any inhibition or any interference by just doing a leg extension or a sissy squat. In other words, without the participation or the simultaneous involvement of the hip extension.
Huh.
Yeah, it redefines this whole thing.
I would love to pursue this notion of, for example, leg extensions, right? We're told all the time, oh, leg extensions, bad for your knees. Don't do those. I've never really understood that. I mean, just based upon what you've said here, and I know we're not talking just about leg extensions, but it sounds as though, for example, leg extensions would be a more effective or efficient exercise for that muscle or muscle group than a compound exercise like front squat or a back squat, something like that. Am I right about this, or am I kind of off base here?
Yes. Now let me explain what happens when you do a leg extension.
Please.
First, let me just say that your quadricep is no different than the triceps of your arm. The mechanics of your leg and the mechanics of your arm are almost identical. Two bones or two solid objects with one hinge joint in between. So the criticism that people say about the leg extension is that you've got a perpendicular resistance against the ankle, which would then theoretically shear the knee.
I've heard this.
You've heard this probably, right?
Yeah,
Physical therapists obviously shear the knee. That is not only completely provably false. In fact, let me tell you how you prove it, okay? I took a piece of wood and I connected it to another piece of wood with just a piece of rubber. And I videotaped me pushing on this bone, piece of wood, low versus high. Okay, so when you push low, it swivels. When you push high, it shifts in a little bit. That would be the shearing effect. Okay, when it moves away. So they're thinking that if you push inward on that shin, that the whole shin is going to move away from the knee. But not only does that not happen when you push low, right? Why does it happen because when you push low, you use the magnification of that length of that lower leg, which then minimizes. In other words, if this thing was 3 times longer, you would need to push very hard to get this thing to go in.
Right.
So what happens is that let's just say that you're doing a 100-pound leg extension. Okay. So you've got 50 pounds per leg. Okay. But that 50 pounds per leg is going to be magnified by the length of your lower leg by the time it gets to your quadricep. Okay. So your quadricep isn't contracting with 50 pounds of force. It's contracting with 1,000 pounds of force because this is almost a 20-inch lever.
All right.
So you're getting about a 20-to-1 ratio of magnification for that 50 pounds. So you're getting about 1,000 pounds of required force by this contraction. So what happens? That quadricep comes across the top of your leg, wraps around your knee, ties into your lower leg just below the knee, right about there.
Right.
Okay, and that quadricep pulls up and over. So you've got 50 pounds of force pushing at the ankle, but 1,000 pounds of force pulling upward and over. That's an anchoring effect.
Okay.
It is mathematically impossible for your lower leg to shift inward when you have 20 times more anchoring force than you do perpendicular force.
Okay.
And you can also demonstrate that there is no shifting inward of the leg, even without quadricep contraction. You don't even need anchoring force if you're pushing low as opposed to pushing high. So first of all, let's just dispel this idea that there's any shearing happening. The second thing I'll say is when you're doing a tricep extension on your back, a skull crusher, right? You don't see it because gravity is invisible, right? But when you're doing this, gravity is doing the exact same thing. It's pushing this way against your forearm bone. In other words, if you could imagine a leg extension machine turned around so that the leg and the upper arm were the exact same position, you would realize that a leg extension is no different than a skull crusher. But no one worries about a skull crusher shearing your elbow.
Right.
Right? So a leg extension is equivalent to a tricep extension.
Huh.
Okay, that's number 2. Number 3 is that when someone says, I have pain in my knee, which doesn't happen always, by the way. Someone says, I have pain in my knee when I do leg extensions. And let's discount those people that have bad knees, right? So they have good knees, but their knees hurt, right? We forget that when we do a tricep extension with dumbbells, we determine the trajectory of those dumbbells, not a machine. When you're in a leg extension machine, you're dealing with 2 knees that are turned at a different axis and a machine that's forcing those 2 axes to act as one in one direction. So leg extensions go straight forward, right? But knees don't. Knees go out, right? Your toes point outward. If you look down at your feet, your heels are closer together, your toes are out. That's because your femurs are rotated externally a little bit, which means that your knee axes are slightly turned also. So if you sit on a massage table, let your legs dangle, and then straighten your leg out, you would notice not only that your left leg goes that way and your right leg goes that way, but they do so at a diagonal. That's the axis that a leg extension machine should have. And that pivot of the machine needs to be right alongside your knee so the machine and your leg travel the exact same trajectory. But the leg extension machine that I use has a pivot point that is literally below the seat level. I literally have to bring my butt up with pads to lower my knee in order to get it to be alongside the pivot of them. So there are reasons, there are reasons of design that sometimes bother knees, but it has nothing to do with the extension itself. There's nothing wrong with loading the end of an operating lever of a muscle in order to create resistance for that operating muscle. It's a perfectly good exercise.
So that was the first of 3 interviews with 2019 AAU Mr. Universe Doug Brignole. I hope you liked this one. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe and come back for the next 2. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.